Hey guys, welcome to the Fish North Georgia podcast, where we talk about everything fishing here in North Georgia. In today's episode, we step into the beautiful world of fly fishing. The streams here in North Georgia are full of rainbow, brown, and brook trout, and the opportunities are endless. Our guest today will tell us about the techniques that he uses, the patterns, the equipment, what to look for in these streams, and just how to chase these fish to give you the best opportunity for success. His name is Daniel Massingale. He's a professional fly guide with On the Fly Excursions. So sit back, enjoy this, and soak up his knowledge. Hey man, what's going on?
Not a whole lot, just got off the water.
I'm telling you, it's been a long day. For those that are listening, we are doing something a little different today. This is our first podcast done on location. So we are outside right now, and you want to tell the listeners where we're recording from?
We are recording from Noontoolah Creek Farms on Noontoolah Creek in Blue Ridge, Georgia.
So basically, guys, if you go up 515, you turn on 76. Was that the road we turned on? Go to the food line, take a right.
Yep, Asker Road.
Asker Road, and you just drive.
Yep.
Beautiful location out here. And we have been up here all day filming Daniel and his buddy Eric Hurst, doing some fly fishing, catching some monster rainbows. And we have learned an absolute ton today. And we can't wait to get the footage out. We're going to do a short film about Daniel, and it's going to be on our YouTube channel. We appreciate you doing that.
Oh, most definitely.
So basically for our listeners today, just tell them a little bit about yourself.
I'm Daniel Massingale. I'm 30 years old. I'm a full-time fly fishing guide in Blue Ridge, Georgia. I have a wife and 2 kids at home, and I really love getting after these trout.
And watching you do it, I can tell. Who do you guide for?
My main guide service that I guide for is On the Fly Excursions, and the second guide service that I work for is Fly Shop Co.
Okay, is there a difference between the two? Do they concentrate on different bodies of water?
Yes and no. It just depends. The trips that I do for On the Fly Excursions can either be public or private, and Fly Shop Co. is strictly private water.
Now today we are on private water.
Yes, sir.
However, a lot of people hear private water, they think stocked fish, tamed fish, and I have found out today that that's not the case.
Yep, that's
So,
exactly.
These are wild.
Yes, sir. Yep, it's most definitely not a cakewalk.
How did you get into trout fishing in the beginning?
From the beginning, it was pretty much me riding down the road with my dad, seeing a guy out in the stream. He was just whipping this line back and forth, and I was like, Dad, I got to try it. And from there, it went from, Dad, I want a fly rod. Well, he's like, well, you do your chores, you get good grades in school, we'll buy you a fly rod. So he bought me a fly rod. I went out there. I looked like a complete idiot at first. Mind you, I was 12 or 13 years old when I started this.
Well, that's okay. I'm 47. I'd look like the same idiot right now if I tried.
You all got to start somewhere.
That's right.
And then from there, it just went from, I want to go every weekend, then I wanted to go every day. And then as I was working a regular full-time job, I would save my money up. I'd drive 2.5, almost 3 hours up here, and I would just get after it. And I just kept going and going and going. And it took me probably a year, almost 2 years to finally land a fish on my own. And then after that, it ended up, hey, I'm tired of buying flies. I want to try to tie my own flies. So I started tying flies. I started doing research. I started reading books, watching YouTube videos, just experimenting with different things. And then one day I booked a guided trip with a guide up here. And I said, you know what? You're living the dream. I want to do it. And I booked him again and again and again. And he's like, man, you got a spark in you that nobody else around here has. He's like, and I want you to work with me. So I ended up working with him. And then one thing led to another. On the Fly Excursions started. And boom, here I am.
That's awesome. So I noticed you said that in the beginning you had to drive a few hours to get up here. So where did you live previous?
Previous to Blue Ridge, I lived in a little town called Zebulon.
Zebulon.
Yep, in Pike County.
Pike County. So that's for you deer hunters down there. That's a big place from what I hear.
Almost definitely. It butts up to Meriwether County. It has some of the biggest deer in the state.
So now you're up here. What were some of the early lessons that you learned before you on your own, you're trying to figure things out? Tell the listeners, maybe the first light bulb moment that you had.
First light bulb moment? Oh, that'd have to be learning where to aim my cast, how far to cast it, and not smack the crap out of the water when you do cast.
That's very important. Now, the way I describe fly fishing, and I am coming from the vantage point that I do not know how to do it. I'm a bass fisherman. So when I see somebody fly fishing, to me it's an art form.
Most definitely.
There's a lot of science to it. There's all kinds of stuff that, we as bass fishermen, we hit our bait casters and we think, we can lay that thing in there like we want it and it's beautiful, but there's something different about watching you guys with a fly rod. So what's the appeal of it?
The appeal? Well, it's a whole bunch of science in one little box. You got to know how far ahead of that fish in the current you got to put that fly, how deep to put that fly, what size fly to even put down there, and are they even going to eat it, or are they just going to lift up off the bottom and move over, which is we've seen a lot of that today.
Yeah, we did. And now let's start from the beginning. Let's talk about the standard setup for somebody maybe just getting started, and then we will move on up to an advance. So somebody just getting started, describe the rod and the setup.
In my opinion, just starting up, I would probably go with either an Echo base model 5-weight, which comes with everything in the box. All you do is pull it out, put it together, string the line, put a fly on it, sling it out.
Now, when you say 5-weight, what are you talking about?
5-weight is probably about, it's a little bigger than an ultralight spinning reel.
Okay, so weight on a fly rod describes the higher the weight, the sturdier the rod, or the heavier duty, or?
It kind of goes action, but the line weight.
The line weight.
Yep.
So we're talking the fly line itself, not the leader, the
Yep.
fly line.
The fly line itself, it either floats or it sinks. So that's the main line coming off your reel. And from that, you'll add a leader to the top. And if you're fishing an indicator, you'll drop tippet below your indicator. Or if you're streamer fishing, like I do 90% of the time, you're just using a straight leader from the fly line.
Okay, so you just gave a lot of different little terminology there that's new to me. So let's start back from the beginning. So we got a 5-weight rod.
Yep.
Your fly line.
Yep.
You started talking about tippets, leaders, and stuff like that.
A lot of moving parts.
A lot of moving parts. So, okay, so before we get into that, we've got to put that line on a reel.
Yep.
So tell everybody out there, what is the difference between a fly reel and a spin reel, baitcaster, as far as how they work?
Well, your normal spinning reel, baitcaster, they have a locking drag, and usually the spool on it will lock. On a fly reel, it's complete opposite. It's 2 gears. You just lock it on there. It does not lock down at free spools. And if you really want to get down to the nitty-gritty of it, all a fly reel is a glorified line holder.
So rod, reel,
Yep.
line.
Yep.
Real quick about line for somebody that's just starting out. Kind of describe the line.
Now there's probably 1,000 different lines out there. I mean, from Cortland to Rio to a bunch of other untold names, and there's different stages of it. You got floating line, which floats on the surface. You're going to use that for most of your dry dropper setups. What
is a dry dropper setup?
A dry dropper setup is where you use a large dry fly, and you'll drop either a small or big nymph below it, and you can stack them. I mean, I've seen people throw 4 nymphs underneath the dry fly before. And what you're doing is pretty much mimicking a live large bug that has either died, or it's laying its eggs, or it's getting a drink of water. So instead of using a plastic bobber, like most people are used to using on like a lake or a pond, the more natural dry fly indicator, you'll get more looks.
So for the beginner, 5-weight rod.
Yep.
Basic line holder reel.
That's it.
Okay, we can go with a fly line that can be floating or
Sinking. Yep.
All right, and so on the end of this line, I'm going to assume is the
Leader.
leader.
Yep.
Okay, so describe how you connect the leader to a fly line, because that's 2 different types of line.
Now, most standard leaders, like if you go, say, to Bass Pro Shop and buy a fly line leader, say Cortland, for instance, it's going to have a welded loop on the end of your fly line, which comes on 90% of the line. If it doesn't, then you're going to have to tie a nail knot from the fly line to the leader. So that connects that. It's almost like a blood knot, except for you're not tying the fly line into the actual leader material. It's just leader material to the fly line, and it cinches down tight. Now, most standard, the better fly line, I should say, has a welded loop on it. Well, on the end of most leaders is a loop knot. So you'll merge the loop knot to the fly line loop. You just push it over, stick the end of the leader through the loop, pull it tight, and it makes a connection. It makes like a security loop almost.
Gotcha.
So from there, you'll pick your desired length. Some guys like using the 9-foot leader to an indicator. Some people like using a 4-foot leader to the indicator.
Is there an advantage in any given situation, one over the other?
Now, clear water, picky fish, longer leader, better. That's more of out west where you have wide open spaces. Here in Georgia, we got a lot of trees. So the shorter you can get it, the better your cast will be. Your accuracy actually gets better the shorter it is.
What is the best way for somebody who is new to fly fishing to practice the cast?
Well, I mean, bass guys, they'll go out in the backyard with a 5-gallon bucket. They'll flip a jig to it, they'll cast to it, or they'll even stand in the driveway and try to flip a jig underneath their truck. Now, you can do the same thing with a fly rod. Get you a nice open spot, get used to the back and forth motion with it, and then start putting you a target out there. Don't tie a fly on there because, of course, you're going to hook whatever you're throwing at, or you get hung in the grass or a tree, whatever. Just naked fly line, whip it back and forth a couple times, try to hit the bucket, get close to the bucket, get a different angle, then take a couple steps back and keep just whipping it at it. The disadvantage to doing it out of the water is the grass or the ground doesn't move. So you're not going to get the same pull back as what the water would.
Gotcha.
So if you can go to a creek and you feel confident with yourself, which is most people they freak out. You're in the water, the fly line's moving, you're getting tangled up on sticks, rocks, you're stepping on it, it's all over your feet. I would say just practice with no fly on the end of it. Cast, load the rod up, pull back, whip the crap out of it.
Do you think it would be better for somebody starting out to get with a guide first?
Most definitely. I mean, some people are do-it-yourself people. A lot of people are perfectionists with it. I highly recommend using the guide. I mean, I used a guide when I started. There's a lot of things that a guide can teach you that YouTube can't teach you, a book can't teach you. You're out there one-on-one with them. You make a couple casts, you're not feeling good about it. That guide can say, hey, you need to lift a little higher. You need to sling it a little more. You need to turn your shoulder. You need to move that foot back, point your belly button in a certain direction and your shoulder the other. I mean, it's like, I look at it this way. When I teach people, I'm like, think about throwing a baseball. Wherever the shoulder that's not holding the rod is facing is where that fly is going to go.
Gotcha.
So we try to use terminology that makes sense. Like, say, for instance, if I told you to cut your shoulder this way and throw it that way, you would look at me like I was funny. But if I said, hey, I know you've thrown a baseball before. When you throw that baseball, you got your shoulder pointed at your target. And that's how you want to start. And that is pretty much how we teach a water load cast or a single haul cast. That's where you're just letting the water take the line, you're lifting your arm up, letting the water break physics of that fly, and then you're just lifting your arm up, and then boom. We call it's a 3-step process. It's called lift, look, and place.
I do recommend the guide. I think that is the absolute smartest thing to do.
Yep.
But for someone who is a do-it-yourselfer, are there books out there or things that you recommend for the terminology?
For the terminology, YouTube would probably be the best. I mean, because you can read it. Some people are hands-on learners. Some people are, you can read it and you go out and do it. But YouTube, it's an awesome platform. For one, you can watch the whole video. You can pause it, go try that, come back, start it back again, or you can rewind it. The book, it works, but YouTube is the new horizon for teaching. I mean, then that's on so many levels. I mean, you can figure out how to change a battery in a car that you've never seen before with YouTube.
That's very true.
YouTube is like the ultimate do-it-yourself teacher.
You kind of described the setup for somebody that's new getting into it.
Yep.
What kind of rod do you use?
I use Moonshine Rods. It's really all preference with the rods. It's like buying a car. Some people like Ford because they like the way it looks. They like the way that the company's set up. Some people drive a Chevy or a Dodge or maybe even Toyota. It's all personal preference. Now, a lot of it goes based on reviews for most people. And then some people, they'll just pick up a rod and say, hey, this feels good. It's like gun shopping for the deer hunters. You pick up a gun, you're like, yeah, it feels okay. But then you pick up this other gun and you're like, that's it.
Sits well.
That's it. A lot of people are cosmetic with their stuff, and that's fine, that's 90% of the fishing world. These people make these rods to cosmetically please the angler, so they sell them. Doesn't necessarily mean that it performs.
Correct.
Going back to a new setup, when people say, hey, what do you recommend for me? The first question I ask them is, how many times a year are you going to do this? Or how many times a year do you think you're going to do this? Now, that's based on a lot of things. Now, if you're just getting into it, I suggest buying a rod that's under $200. For one, you just spent $200 on rod, reel, and line and a case. Say you go out here, you hate it. You don't like it, it frustrates you to the max. You get out here with a $500 reel for the first time, it's going to be hard to resell that rod if you want to get rid of it.
Right.
Because, you go drop $500 to $1,000 on a rod, somebody's going to be like, I'm not paying $1,000 for a rod that's touched water.
Gotcha.
Start small, work yourself big. Like, if you're going to do it once every 6 months or once every 2 years, don't waste your money on the expensive stuff, because, it's just going to sit in the closet and collect dust.
But now you make your living doing this.
Yes, most definitely.
And so the brand rod you use, I'm sure is tried and tested with you.
Most definitely. I use them every day. Moonshine Rods, they're a small batch company. One of their home offices is actually in Knoxville, Tennessee. Actually, I take that back, it's Nashville. They're not a corporation, they're a company.
Right.
They have 5 full-time rod builders. They'll get out with their ambassadors and fish.
And you're an ambassador for Moonshine.
Yes, sir. I've been with them for 3, almost 4 years now.
And it's a beautiful rod.
Yes, it is.
It's an absolutely beautiful rod to look at. And when you talk about it being cosmetically pleasing, I thought it was myself.
They're beautiful. The part I really like about it is they built those rods and they sell them at a working man's budget.
Gotcha.
So, you're getting the quality of a $1,000 rod for $200. Their most expensive rod's $300.
That's good.
And the warranty on it, which comes with most every rod company, and it's a no-hassle warranty. And the beautiful thing about it is they put a spare tip section in that rod case. No other rod company does that. Most companies, you bust the tip off of it, they're like, okay, well, send me $60, send me the rod tip back, we'll rebuild it and send it back to you. Moonshine has that extra spare in that tube.
So you're talking about the section, a little section. So this is one that breaks down into several pieces or however many pieces. So you get an extra end section.
Yep. Most fly rods, they'll either come in 2-piece, 3-piece, or 4-piece. And there's travel rods that break down into like 6 to 8 pieces, but the standard rod is 4 pieces. So you're getting that whole extra 4th piece of that rod for free in your case.
What's the length of the rod that you use today?
The length of the rods that I use today is 9 foot.
9 foot.
Yep. They make them 7 foot, 10 foot. I think there's even some 13-foot rods out there.
Given the terrain that we're fishing today, or that you fished today, we were watching a lot of overhanging stuff, a lot of stuff hanging over on the sides. So a 9-foot rod, would you say that's optimum for a creek this size? And I would say that the creek was, 15, 20 feet across, maybe a little wider in places?
Yeah, I'd say that. I'd say probably about 2-lane road width, maybe. If you had to, draw it out on paper, it'd probably be about 2 roads. It's about a foot low now, so I'd say about 15, 20.
Why 9 foot?
Well, the length of the rod, that helps, with your casting ability. So if you have a 7-foot rod, you're trying to sling 30 or 40 foot, you're not going to get the load from the water with the 7-foot rod.
Now, when you say load, is that the same type of load that we would get with a bass rod, where we bring it back and we're getting that bend back, the whip forward?
Yep, that's the load.
Okay. So 9 foot kind of helps you with that load.
Yep.
So I can't imagine what kind of load you get with a 13 foot.
The 13-foot rods, that's more of a nymphing rod, and we can touch, that later. That's more of a basic roll cast in your we do what we call a high stick. So you throw it up current and you'll hold your rod tip high and you just let that drift down. So the longer the rod, the more sensitive the tip. So the 9 foot is like the happy medium, just like the 5-weights, the happy medium. It's universal. You can catch big fish on it, you can catch small fish on it and still enjoy it.
Now tell me a little bit about the reel that you use.
The reel that I use is a 310 TF70, which is their 6-weight version of it. I know 70 is a little high number for a 6-weight, but it's a streamer reel pretty much, or, a lot of guys use it for bass.
Okay. And streamer was predominantly what you threw today?
Yep.
Okay.
That's my go-to confident pattern. It's like the guys that bass fish. You got jerkbait guys, you got spinnerbait guys, and you got your finesse guys, and you even got your topwater guys.
Right.
Which is, if you take bass fishing and flip the book over, it's fly fishing. So...
Okay, so explain that. I understand what you're saying, but explain that to someone listening, because in my mind, especially when we sat down to start talking about this, fly fishing is foreign to me.
Yep.
But if you can make it similar to bass fishing.
Yep.
Make me understand it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So teach me right there.
Okay, so your finesse guys, you worm guys, for those that don't exactly know what finesse fishing is.
Right.
So that would be your Euro guys or your check niff guys, which goes with the 13-foot rod. So you're pretty much throwing it up current, letting it bounce the bottom, and you're going off feel. So you're waiting on that little tick-tick feel from the end of your rod, like your bass worm. So once you feel that tick-tick, you're setting the hook. Now, streamer fishing goes more along the lines of the guys that like throwing crankbaits and jerkbaits. You're actually moving that fly. So you're throwing it either up current, down current, or across the current, and you're stripping it back, which means pulling the line through your finger and putting action on that fly. Now, that being said, that's probably the most in-depth fly fishing there is, because you're casting and you're retrieving it, just like you would with a baitcaster or spinning rod. So you're actually moving the fly the whole time. You're making the motion of the fly. The other form is dry fly fishing. That goes along with topwater fishing, except for you're not exactly twitching that dry fly. You're throwing it up the current or drifting it down the current, and you're waiting for that explosion. A lot of guys that like fly fishing, the older guys I should say, are more dry fly fishing, because that was the original form of fly fishing, was throwing a dry fly. And then the nymphs come in the stage, and then one of the greatest guys in fly fishing history, Kelly Gallup, come up with streamer fishing. And then he just blew everything off the charts. You know, he was an outlaw with it at first, and then it started building up, and then, you know, you got guys all around the world creating streamers now, because it's a different feel. You know, with the streamer, you know, the strike's different, because, you know, you're working that.
And what is a streamer trying to mimic?
Oh, shoot, it can imitate a lot of things, from a mouse to a crawfish to certain types of bait fish. I mean, here we're trying to imitate a fish called a sculpin, which is in the goby family. If I'm thinking correctly, should be in the goby family. It's a bottom-dwelling fish, and these fish love them. You know, a lot of streamers, they mimic certain, well, I shouldn't say certain things, a numerous amount of things. You know, you could take, like a sex dungeon, it could be a crawfish pattern, it could be a bait fish pattern, it could be a leech pattern. It all depends on how you retrieve that fly. So it can mimic a lot of things, just depending on where you're throwing it, what color you're throwing, and how you retrieve it.
So today I watched you predominantly streamer fish.
Yep.
Some of them were larger than the others, so different sizes.
Yep.
I do remember you throwing one big one.
Yep.
And that's what you were trying to mimic, was a sculpin.
Yep.
With that. The one, if you get to watch our video when it comes out, he catches a monster rainbow on a buddy's pattern called Frankenstein. Or
yep.
What is that? Is a sculpin as well, or?
It can be a sculpin, it could be a dace, it could be a sucker fish. I mean, it could be...
And it's much smaller. The first one we're talking about was about how many inches?
I'd say about 6.5, 7.
6.5, 7 inches. And the one you caught the big one on was?
About 3 and some change.
So still can mimic just bait fish, just different type.
Yep.
So a sculpin is a little larger.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's 5 or 6 different species of sculpin. I mean,
Okay.
They range from an inch long all the way up to 10 inches long. I mean, it just depends on where they're at, how much water they have. It's kind of the goldfish effect. You know, you put a goldfish in a small bowl, he's only going to stay small. You put him in a 10-gallon tank, he's going to be a monster. It's kind of the same thing.
Fly fishing is very technical.
Very.
That's what I'm learning. Today, we were targeting rainbow
Yep.
and brown trout.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
With the possibility of a brook trout.
With the possibility of a brook trout. So explain to everybody out there. Everybody knows pretty much what a rainbow trout is.
Oh, most definitely. It's the most well-known common trout species there is.
The difference in the rainbow trout that most people see and the ones we see here is just size.
Yep.
And you also said that one of the fish you caught today could be up to 10 years old.
Very slow-growing fish.
What is the life expectancy in the best possible situation for a rainbow trout?
If I had to put a number on it, I'd say about 15 years.
Really?
Under good conditions, yep.
15 years. And what's the top range of the weight scale?
Oh, man.
In a stream like this. I realize that if you get them in a lake, they can get bigger. I think I've seen some big ones in lakes.
In this creek, I would say probably 15 pounds would probably be about the biggest fish that I've seen in here.
15-pound rainbow.
Yep, and that's probably...
How many inches?
If I had to put a number on it, probably about 33 inches.
Okay. And so today you caught rainbows.
Yep.
We didn't get any browns.
Nope.
What's the difference between a brown trout and a rainbow trout?
The rainbow trout, they're more of a scavenger. So they're more opportunistic fish. They'll go out of their way to chase flies, as you've seen today, but they're more the lazy type. I mean, brown trout are lazy too, but they're going to use their surroundings as an advantage. They're the predator. If you had to really put it in the form, think about a brown trout as a lion and a rainbow trout as a bear. The lion's going to sit back and wait for his meal. He'll chase it, he'll hunt it, but he's going to wait on that certain meal. Now the bear, he's going to go through the woods. He might see some berries. He's going to get those berries. He's going to flip that log. He's going to get those bugs. So the rainbow trout, they'll eat anything. So will a brown trout, but the brown trout's only going to go into that survival mode when he has to.
Gotcha. Now you mentioned brook trout, which we didn't get any of those today.
Nope.
Now they're a little smaller, correct?
Yeah, the biggest, I'd say about the max size, probably about 20 inches around here that you'll see a brook trout. Most of the brook trout you'll see here are probably 4 to 8 inches long.
And I failed to ask the question, but do the browns get as big as the rainbows?
Browns are actually bigger.
Bigger than the rainbows.
Yep.
How about life expectancy?
Life expectancy, I'd say probably about 17, 18 years.
Really? And so what would be the top end size of a brown trout on a creek like this?
Pushing high 30s, probably 37. I mean, there's some tanks in here.
Now you said in inches.
Yep.
20 pounds?
Yeah, I'd have to say about 20 pounds.
About 20 pounds. And a fish like that would be, 10 years plus.
Oh, yeah, easy.
Easy 10 years plus. Now, do they share a similar type diet with the rainbow? I know you said scavengers,
Yep.
but is there something specific that a brown will not mess with at all that a rainbow will?
Not really.
It's just the way they attack it.
Yep. Now, a rainbow is faster than a brown, but a brown is stronger. Now, when you get into like the comparison of the two fish, say for instance, we had 75 days of July this year. It was extremely hot. The water got extremely low. A lot of rainbows died. Now, brown trout are super hardy fish. They're survivors. Now, if he goes into survival mode, he's going to do kind of like we do. We'll scavenge and find what we need to survive, and we'll hunt still. The rainbows kind of shut down and go dormant.
Okay.
I mean, it just depends on where you're at, location. I mean, this creek's different than what they'll do in the river and whatnot. A lot of biomass in this river, so their diet is kind of expanded.
Now, when you come to a creek like this, what are the things that you're looking for, the telltale signs that there's a possibility a trout will be in a certain area?
I'm looking for a fast run, or a shoal, as most people call them, with either a foam line or a deep pool at the bottom of it. So I want it to go super fast to medium, very deep spot, and then it evens out. So you're looking for what we call a seam, which is the edge of that fast water line. So typically you'll have your white water, and then you'll have your rolling water, and then you'll have your like spinning water. It almost looks like a whirlpool effect. They're going to be sitting right there. They should be. Now, another thing to look for is undercut banks, which is a bank that has a hole underneath it or water flows underneath it. It's a good hiding spot. Big rocks, overhanging trees, anything that creates shade, and that goes with any species of fish. If it makes shade, they're there.
The browns, do they prefer a different section of the creek? You mentioned the undercut banks.
Yep.
Will bows and browns get up in there, or is it predominantly browns?
Predominantly browns. The rainbows will use it as shelter, but that brown, I don't know if anybody that's listening to this saltwater fishes, but grouper is a prime example. Now that grouper will get out on the reef and he'll hunt. So will a brown. Same concept. Browns prefer the darkness. They like the dark. They like the shadows.
Is it legal to fish for them at night?
Yes, it is. Certain creeks have restrictions on them, but a lot of the creeks will allow you to fish at night. The disadvantage to fishing at night versus the daytime is you're going to fall, you're going to break your rod, you're going to lose some tackle, and if you're floating down the river, you may flip your boat. A lot more room for error in the dark. I mean, like we discussed this morning, you'll make a cast that you think is totally epic, like you bombed it across the creek, and it's right there at your feet. That's the disadvantage. Now, if you flip the light on, those fish are gone. Trout typically like low light conditions because their pupils and their eyes don't dilate like ours do. They get a lot of light with their eyes, so it technically makes them blind, if you had to put it in the word. So low light conditions, their eyes, kind of like a cat, they can see a lot better in low light conditions.
Of the things that you described for the locations of the trout, what's your favorite?
Probably an undercut bank.
Okay.
I like fishing undercut banks. Presents a lot of, advantages, because you can creep around and get your fly into position so many different angles from an undercut bank. The only disadvantage about it is you hook him and he wants to run and he goes back underneath that bank, you better get him out or you're done.
When somebody watches our film,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to notice a big rainbow that you caught.
Yep.
I don't know how it will be edited, but I watched you cast into one specific spot, seems like 20 times in a row.
Yep.
Nothing, 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 nothing. And then boom. I'm trying to remember, was that an undercut bank right there? Or
Yep, that tree's undercut right there. It's got a lot of roots that come out of it. That particular spot has that fast water we just described, and it has the slow pool at the bottom, but it's also deep. So me casting 40 or 50 times in that spot, it's all about getting that fly down just right in his line. Right now, since we got low, clear water, they're hidden pretty good, and they're going to be very picky. So it took me getting that fly in the right spot at the right time to get that fish to eat.
do trout always face up current? They're looking for their meal to come down current.
Always.
So the advantage between coming across a river and letting it float down, what's the differences?
Like you seen this morning, a couple of spots, I let the fly float down from me, down the creek. A lot of people say that that's wrong, and you'll lose a lot of fish that way because you're giving that fish full advantage. He's already facing that direction up towards you, but he can turn around and go down. So you're losing a lot of line, and if you can't run after him, then he's popping you off. The advantage of throwing up or across is you're bringing the bait to you, and you have a lot less slack in your line. So you have the upper advantage right there to gain control of your line, get that fish turned to the direction you want, and he can't dig his head down and use the current against you.
Different times of the year, and let's just use the seasons: fall, winter, spring, summer. Let's say this very same fish that you caught today, you're in the very same spot.
Yep.
Will the baits vary by the seasons, or will you be going after those with the same thing year round?
It most definitely varies. Like right now, you notice today I started using worms and eggs,
Mm-hmm.
and then we started using smaller midges, which is a type of small bug. The hatches are done this time of year. You may get a few stragglers hatching, but right now it's forage food. Now I'll throw a streamer all year. That's like my go-to big fish thing. I may cast it 1,000 times and only hook one fish. It's still my favorite thing.
Seems like it will be a quality fish when you do hook it.
Most definitely. When you're throwing a streamer, you're seeking out that aggressive fish. And most of the time that fish is mature. It's like the big buck in rut. That's when the big dogs come out. And that's how you target big fish. You're going to cast a lot. Your shoulder's going to hurt at the end of the day. You're going to go home and say, hey, I need a back rub. And it's not for everybody.
And my wife feels no sympathy for me after a bass tournament when I say that. You said a ratio today when we were on the water. And if I remember correctly, it was something 3-7.
Yep, and that's on this particular creek.
Now, explain that for people.
The way we got that number, and that's a lot of trial and error.
And that's hookups. We're talking about hookups or we're talking about break-offs? What was it we were talking about?
It was a hookup to break off to, it's pulling the hook. It's a lot of different ratios into one, but on this particular creek, in a 4-hour trip, which is a half-day trip, you'll hook 7 fish, and 3 out of those 7 fish will actually get to the net. Now, that's right. I remember now. That's not the normal ratio. You can hook 12 fish and keep 7 of them. It varies, but the typical here for the average fisherman and even in the beginners, 3 of those fish out of 7 are going to get your hero shot.
Get your hero shot. I also noticed today while you were catching these fish, you didn't force them.
Nope.
Let them play out. Just kind of describe how you think they should be played or what works best for you.
Most of the time, what I try to do is no matter how big the fish is, most of the time you're going to have, it depends on how far you're casting. You may have 5 foot of slack out. You may have 20 or 30 foot of slack out. What I like to do is try to regain all that control of that line and fight the fish on the reel. That way you're not stepping on the line. You're not getting it tangled up anywhere. Pretty much, I would say, let's get it on the reel no matter how big it is. And that just keeps you from fumbling up, because if you hook a rather large fish and you got all that slack out, he's going to murder you. A lot of people think, hey, I can strip in a 30-inch fish on a 5-weight rod in a tight spot. It's not happening. I mean, I've seen it done, but 9 times out of 10, you lock that line down, line goes straight, rod goes straight, boom, you're done.
Now, how does that change on, say, the Toccoa River coming out of Blue Ridge Lake?
It really doesn't change, that's
a little more current, bigger river.
Yeah, it's a lot wider river, way bigger than this. It's probably about 4 of these creeks wide in some spots. It's a different style of fishing, too. The fish aren't as big. I mean, there's potential for a monster fish out of there, but most of those fish are stocked.
Is that due to pressure?
Well, a couple years back, I don't know if y'all heard about the incident that happened with the Nantahala River.
No, go ahead and fill everybody in on that.
The generator on the dam of the Nantahala River broke, whatever happened to it. So by state regulations, they're forced to sluice water over the top of the dam. Now, everybody knows, or most people know, that surface temperature of most lakes, ponds, or rivers is higher than the bottom. So when they pull water from the dam, they're pulling water from the bottom, so it's cold. And these trout have to have cold water to survive. Anything above 70 degrees, they start dying. Very temperature sensitive. So when they dumped that water over the top of the dam, they were putting 70-degree plus water into that river, which killed all those fish. 10 or 15 years ago, the same thing happened in Blue Ridge. It killed everything. Correct me if I'm wrong down the road, but it killed almost every wild fish in the river.
Really?
Yep.
So the ones that are in there now are pretty much stockers?
Pretty much. I'd say 90% of them are stockers. And I mean, you still get some that come from the headwater and then make their way through the lake and get sucked down. I mean, just like any other fish. 90% of the stockers in this area are sterile, and half of them don't even make it through the summer. That's like breeding dogs, in my opinion. I mean, every generation is weaker and weaker, and they have their disadvantages. Now, they're still pretty, they still taste good, but physically, they're not.
Just not even the same fish as what we saw today.
Nope.
And I noticed several times today you mentioned the Sakui.
Yep, the Soquee River.
Soquee.
Yep.
The difference in the fish there and the fish here, you were making comparisons.
Yep.
So kind of tell me, for somebody that's thinking about booking a fly fishing trip, why it would be better to come up here to Blue Ridge than it would be to go there.
Well, I mean, that's kind of a touchy subject on that.
I knew I'd get you on something here.
So the advantage here is these fish are wild. A wild fish, he has everything built to survive in his body. They don't depend on somebody to take care of. Now the fish down there, a stalker, a big stalker, yeah, he's going to give you a run for his money, but he's going to fight you for an extended period of time and he's going to give up. A wild fish is going to fight you from the get-go to the death, and he's not going to stop.
And you're saying that the Sakui,
yep, is primarily stocked fish. Now, there are some wild fish in there.
But primarily stocked.
Yep.
And every fish here on this river or this creek is wild?
Yep, 100% stream bred.
What about when we get to places like the Chattahoochee?
The Chattahoochee, it has a mixture. There's wild fish in the hooch, and there's stock fish in the hooch.
Now let's talk about from Lake Lanier up.
Lake Lanier up, it's primarily wild.
Primarily wild?
Yep.
Do they stock up around Helen some, I'm sure? Or?
Most definitely, they stock up there. But, I mean, that right there is like the 60-40 split. There's wild fish and there's stock fish.
Is it mostly rainbows in that section?
I mean, there's some browns mixed in with it, but primarily, I mean, if the state's going to stock it, it's 90% rainbow.
90% rainbows.
Yep.
Now, from Buford Dam down through Roswell, or however far down the trout can actually survive.
Yep.
Same ratio, 60-40, or...
Yeah, I'd always say, rainbows in the south are probably the dominant species.
What about size, though, given the size of the Chattahoochee? Do they get any bigger down there than they do here?
This creek right here is special. I mean, it's got everything they need to, build a nuclear warhead.
This is the ultimate environment as far as North Georgia is concerned for a wild trout.
In my opinion, yes.
Do you think this is the best stream in the state?
As far as private water with wild fish, yes.
What would be the best public stream in the state?
Ooh.
Let's just go North Georgia, because I would imagine Chattahoochee from the dam down, pretty much it's public, or you can float it or whatever.
Yeah.
So let's stay in the mountains up this way.
Goodness gracious, there's so many. There's so many good ones too.
You have a client. This is
Yep.
closed tomorrow. You got to put them on a trophy public fish.
Ooh.
Yeah, so we're talking a whole different ball game than just going and catching some snits. Do y'all still? Is it still called a snit? The standard 9-inch trout,
Oh, we call them cookie cutters now.
cookie cutters.
Yep.
Okay, so back in my generation, they were called snits.
Yep.
So cookie cutters. All right, so we don't want to catch any cookie cutters.
Nope.
So we want to go to a public place that's wild. You got a client. He says, just put me on something. Even if we don't catch it, where's my best possibility to catch a huge trout on public water in North Georgia?
Probably public Noontoolah. I've caught some monsters on the public section here. My idea of a monster wild fish outside of private water
Right.
is probably about 13 or 14 inches.
Okay, and that's fair. I
Yep.
understand why you're saying that.
With that being said, too, the scenery is worth it, too. So, like you said, whether you catch a fish or not, with the possibility of it, you're getting that beautiful scenery.
What about access for the public? How is that up here?
It's spot on perfect. I mean, anywhere you can pull off the side of the road and you feel comfortable climbing down that hill or even parking in a campsite and jumping in. A lot of access. Even on the, the tailwater here and the headwater, there's a lot of drop-in spots. Pretty much, you just need to figure out where people are parking, follow their trail, hop in, and then make your own decision.
Now, I get the stocking report from Wildlife, and they send it out every week. And I know that during the wintertime, of course, they stock more of the northern places than they do down towards Dawson County and stuff like
Yep.
that. Up in this area, Blue Ridge, Fannin, let's go on up to Blairsville that way. What are some of the better spots for somebody who is interested in going to catch a limit of trout? I know you're catch and release here,
Yep.
but let's say with the stockers, they want to catch some to take home and eat. You got any good locations or good, possibilities?
Well, of course, the headwater here in Blue Ridge on the Toccoa turns into what we call a delayed harvest, the beginning of November. So with the delayed harvest, it's catch and release only, single hook, artificial, no live bait, no power bait, no nothing.
And I think that's the way the Amicalola is in Dawson County, from
Yep.
like Devil's Elbow down to the 53
Yep.
bridge.
They have a mark. Shallowford Bridge all the way up to Sandy Bottom is pretty much delayed harvest. Now, if you wanted to catch trout during this time of year, you'd have to fish the tailwater section, which is from the dam below. In that section, you can fish right behind the dam, as long as you check the generation schedule. Then you got Tamman Park, which is not even a quarter mile down from the dam. You can actually walk out the boat ramp and look to your right and see the dam. You got Curtis Switch, which is another good place to drop in. And then you got Horseshoe Bend State Park.
Now, when you say drop in it, are you talking about floating it, or is this somewhere you can fish from the bank?
90% of these places you can wade.
You can wade.
Yep, as long as the river's not generating, you can get in and wade. Now, there is some deep spots, but probably about 90% of it you can walk waist high.
Would you say that most of the streams and rivers from, say, LJ north, at least in the mountainous section of Georgia, have trout?
Most definitely. There's a possibility for it anywhere. If there's running water here and it's deep enough for their body to be submerged in, there's going to be trout in it.
So these places that are stockers and stuff, fly fishing, any different there since it's a stock trout? I imagine a stock trout's probably going to eat a little easier than a wild trout. So what would be a good pattern for somebody who says, I'm going to learn how to fly fish. I'm going to go to Curtis Switch up here off the Toccoa River. What would be a good pattern this time of year for somebody like that to try?
A little nymph we call a rainbow warrior, hare's ears, pheasant tails, and those are all variations of mayflies and stoneflies. You can use a scud pattern, which is a freshwater shrimp. You can use woolly boogers, which imitates a leech, a crawfish, or a minnow pattern. And any of your basic flies those fish will eat.
And everything you just said, I probably could go to Google, type it in, and can see what you're talking about.
Most definitely. A pheasant tail, I mean, it'll pull up 1,000 different pictures because there's so many variations to it. And that's what, another cool thing about fly fishing, is you integrate fly tying into it. And then, this guy come up with the pattern originally. Well, this guy said, I like that pattern, but I want to throw a twist on it. So you'll get soft hackle pheasant tails, rubber leg pheasant tails. You'll get different color pheasant tails. It's not the traditional brown. And that's the magic in it.
Now, of the flies you have, how many do you tie yourself?
Shoot.
What percentage?
I'd say about 80% of them I tie.
Now, how long did it take for you to get proficient in doing that?
2 or 3 years of sitting down for hours at a time, sleepless nights, I was getting mad. The fun part about it, is when you're first starting, is you got an idea in your head. You lock that hook in the vise. You decide you want to bead on it, how heavy you want it, what color you want it. You could paint an image in your head, but it doesn't always turn out that way.
Do you remember the first trout you caught on your own fly?
Most definitely.
Let's talk about that.
It was actually here on public Noontoolah, a yellow Sally variation. Now, most yellow Sallies, which is a stonefly, are supposed to be a dry fly. I turned it into a beadhead, so it sank. And I got that idea out of my head. I was like, well, these flies are floating on top of the water, laying their eggs, and they're dying and floating on top of the water. So what happens to this bug when he hits a current? He's going underneath the water. And what's to say that these fish ain't going to say, ooh, easy meal, I'm going to grab it. So I started tying it with a bead. And then I played with it, got the body tighter, smaller, slimmer, started adding legs to it and hackle to it. And then I said, finally, I got it. So I probably spent about 7 or 8 hours up there on that creek with nothing. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to try it. It's not going to hurt. Tried everything else except this. Put it on, third cast, boom, got my first fish. And I remember it was a little 8-inch rainbow, little sturdy thing.
That's awesome. So you've caught your very first trout.
Yep.
And so now you've gone into tying your own flies. Is it more economical for you to tie your own flies than to go buy pre-made flies? Or is it just more of a labor of love, I want to do it myself?
It's a little bit of everything. Now, your typical fly at a fly shop, let's say a nymph, like that pheasant tail we were just talking about. Now, on average, depending on if it's a tungsten bead, which is a heavier bead, or if it's a brass bead, a lot of shops will charge anywhere from $2 to $3 per fly, which gets expensive. Now, a dozen flies will cost you about $50, give or take, depending on where you buy it at. So the advantage of buying your own materials and tying your own flies versus buying them, it depends on how deep you want to get into it. Now, I can spend $200 on tying materials, get a couple hundred hooks, make the flies how I want them, and I can tie however many flies per hooks I have, depending on material. So the advantage of tying my own, is more economical in a sense. Now, if you're in a pinch, and you need flies right then, or you don't have the time to tie them, which is what happens to me some cases, it's easier to buy them or order them offline. But if you want that one particular pattern with your own twist on it, and you don't want to drive to town to get it, or you don't want to deal with the guys at the fly shop, it's more economical to just tie them.
You've had this question asked to you already today, but what is it about a trout that stirs you inside, that makes you stay up at night, get up in the morning? What is it about this one specific type of fish?
It's the challenge of them. You can see them sitting there.
Which we saw many today.
Most definitely. You can see them sitting there. You can throw everything at your box at those fish, and they will not touch it. 10 minutes from now, you can go out there with that same ply and throw it out there. They'll eat it. You actually have to use your mind a little bit to figure out, hey, I either need this fly on the bottom, I need it up in the water column, or I need to move it. So trying to figure these fish out and the challenge that they give me is why I love them.
It's a very demanding job.
Yeah, most definitely. Like, I'll give up sleep, I'll give up eating, I'll give up a lot of things to go hunt a trout.
That is obsession.
Very much so.
Early on, or even now, let's just say now, do you have a hero? Or better yet, somebody that if you can't figure something out, you can go bounce something off?
Yeah, Will Taylor would probably be that guy.
Tell us a little bit about Will Taylor.
Will Taylor, he is the owner of Fly Shop Co., which is another guide service here in Blue Ridge. I do trips for him time to time. He's the guy that, I can call at 5 o'clock in the morning. I can call him at midnight. If I got a question that I'm not really sure about, he's probably the best guy to get my answer from.
Okay, and so I assume he's very helpful when you call him at 5 in the morning?
Depends. He's about as obsessed as I am with it, so he understands. Normally, I'll text him first and say, hey.
Right, hey, you up?
You up, dude. If it's really important, I'll call him, leave him a voicemail. But 90% of the time, yeah, he's up and at it, hard to get it.
Before I let you go, let's kind of discuss on the future of fly fishing.
The future of fly
fishing. The future of fly fishing. where do you think the technology is going to take us? Or is it pretty much, do you think it's kind of maxed out? It is what it is right now as far as the rods and the reels?
Oh, no. No, it can only get better from here. Originally, the first series of fly rods, they're either bamboo or fiberglass. Both have their advantages and their disadvantages. Well, here in the recent years, they've upgraded to graphite, which has more action, they're sturdier, and they're even making carbon fiber rods, which are lighter and stronger. So from here, shoot, the sky's the limit.
And you're talking basically in the construction of the rod, the materials that the
Yep.
stuff's made. But it pretty much will always be the same type of reel, the same type of, you would think,
The concept will all be the same,
just
but
materials.
the materials, the looks, how it performs, shoot, it's changing every day.
What would you say to someone who's getting started in it today?
There's so many ways. I mean, from showing them a YouTube video or even a picture of somebody holding a big oat trout or bass, or they even do fly fishing trips for marlin now. You just got to get that fire in them, and once they get that fire and then they try it, in my opinion to it, fly fishing's either you love it or you hate it. There's no in between with fly fishing.
Right.
I mean, a lot of people find it extremely therapeutic. When I'm out here, I'm in my zone. I'm carefree. I'm still in the back of my head. I'm like, did I take the trash out? Is the old lady going to get mad at me? But I'm sitting here, I'm like, I'm in the flowing water. I'm in God's place. Everything just comes together.
It is a different set of scenes with each bend of the river.
Yep.
Everything's different.
Totally different.
It's very appealing, but I can see where it would be spiritual and therapeutic,
Yep.
but I can see where it'd piss you off too.
Oh, most definitely.
If we're being honest, I
Yep.
can see it. So how many times today did you get broke off?
Shoot. At least 5.
And some of these were just on the hook set.
Yeah. Some of them were just on the hook set. Now, mind you, we was only using 2-pound tippet,
Okay, and see, that's another thing I got to learn down the road,
Yep.
the tippets and stuff.
which is just another form of leader.
Leader.
Yep. We could have bumped it up maybe. We got a lot less hook sets.
But you used the 2-pound tippet because it's hard to be seen
Yep. And we're using fluorocarbon.
in fluorocarbon.
So clear water, use clear line.
Gotcha.
Now, mono, if you use small mono, it's not as strong as fluorocarbon.
Right.
I mean, for the guys that know their line types, fluorocarbon's strong. It doesn't have any stretch to it, which is kind of a disadvantage sometimes. But having that stronger line in a smaller diameter is a benefit. Now, these trout are picky. They have eyes better than a hawk.
Right.
I mean, they will pick out how many times you wrap that thread on that fly and say, nope. They are the pickiest fish around.
That's unbelievable. Daniel, I appreciate you letting us come up here and film you. I appreciate that you've kind of inspired me to pick up one more aspect of fishing, and that's really what we want to do at the end of the day is get others involved. And there's a lot of guys out there like me that can pick up a spin reel and a Panther Martin and go and just rip it across and catch trout.
Yep.
There's not too many people who can do what you do. And when our video comes out, of course, we'll let everybody know, you'll get to see this cat in action, and you're going to see some of these fish. And some of the camera work that Josh, of course, is doing is going to be absolutely outstanding. But it's been an eye-opening experience, but I do appreciate it.
Almost definitely. Anytime.
All right, man. Thanks. Guys, thanks so much for tuning in today. I really hope you learned something that will encourage you to get outside and go fishing. In the meantime, head on over to Facebook and Instagram at Fish North Georgia, where you can connect directly with us. There you're going to see upcoming guests. You can get involved in some of the discussions that we have going on. You can leave us ideas and names of people that you want to hear in the future. So guys, we really appreciate you tuning in. We'll see you next time.